Crimes committed by public officers. Articles 203 to 245. Article 203. Who are public officers? Public officers are any person who, by direct provisions of the law, popular election or appointment by competent authority, shall take part in the performance of public functions in the government of the Philippine Island, or shall perform in said government or in any of its branches public duties as an employee, agent, or subordinate officials of any rank or class shall be deemed to be a public officers. Feasance. Number 1. Misfeasance. Improper performance of some act which might lawfully be done. Number 2. Malfeasance. Performance of an act which ought not to be done. Number 3. Nonfeasance. Omission of some act which ought to be performed. Article 208. Dereliction of duty and prosecution of offenses. Acts punishable. Number 1. By maliciously refraining from institution or persecution against violators of the law. Number 2. By maliciously tolerating the commission of offenses. Elements. Number 1. Offender is public officer of law who has duty to cause prosecution of or to prosecute offenses. Number 2. Dereliction of duties of his office. Knowing commission of crime, he does not cause prosecution of criminals, or knowing that crime is about to be committed, he tolerates its commission. Article 210. Direct bribery. Acts punishable in direct bribery. Number 1. By agreeing to perform or by performing in consideration of any offer, promise, gift, or presents, an act constituting a crime in connection with the performance of his official duties. Number 2. By accepting a gift in consideration of the execution of an act which does not constitute a crime in connection with the performance of his official duty. Number 3. By agreeing to refrain or by refraining from doing something which is his official duty to do in consideration of gift or promise. Act or omission. Agreeing to perform or performing. Accepting a gift and executing. Agreeing to refrain or refraining. Consideration. In return. Act, crime, act, not crime but adjust, omission, and something relative to official duty, in connection with performance of his official duties, in connection with performance of his official duty to do. Article 211. Indirect bribery. Offender, public officer, he accepts gifts and gifts offered to him by reason of his office. Direct bribery versus indirect bribery. Both crimes. Public officer receive gifts. Existence of agreement. Public officer and giver. Presence and absent. Necessity of performance. Number 1. Agrees to perform act. Number 2. Performs act. Number 3. Refrains doing. No requirements for performance of act or promise to do act. Article 211. A. Qualified bribery. Number 1. Offender, public officer or entrusted with law enforcement. Number 2. Offender refrains from arresting or prosecuting offender who has committed crime punishable by RP, reclusion perpetua, and or death. Number 3. Offender refrains from arresting or prosecuting the offender in consideration of any promise, gift, and present. Article 212. Corruption and public officials. Number 1. Offender offers or promises or gives gift or presents to public officer, and 2. Offers or promises made or gifts or presents given to PO under circumstances that will make officers liable for direct bribery or indirect bribery. Bribery and corruption. The bribery is public officer. Article 217. Malversation of public funds or property. Presumption of malversation. Embezzlement, also called malversation. Act punishable in malversation. Number 1. By appropriating public funds or property. By taking or misappropriating the same. By consenting or through abandonment or negligence, permitting any other person to take such public funds or property, and by being otherwise guilty of misappropriation and malversation of such funds or property. Elements common to all acts of malversation. Number 1. Offender is public officer. Number 2. Under his custody or control funds or property by reason of the duties of his office. Number 3. Funds or property, public funds or property for which he was accountable. Number 4. Constitutive circumstances, appropriating, taking, misappropriating, or consenting, or through abandonment or negligence, permitting another person to take them. Article 220. Illegal use of public funds or property. Offender is a public officer. Number 2. Public funds or property under his administration. Public fund or property appropriated by law or ordinance. Constitutive circumstances, applying to public use other than that for which such funds or property has been appropriated by law or ordinance. Article 223. Conniving with or consenting to evasion. Infidelity in the custody of prisoners. Number 1. Offender is a public officer. Number 2. Under his custody or charge. A. Detention prisoner. B. Prisoner by final judgment. Number 3. Prisoners escape from his custody. Number 4. Public officer and connivance with prisoner and later escape. Article 224. Evasion through negligence. The offender is public officer. Number 2. Under his charge, conveyance or custody of prisoner. A. Detention prisoner, or B. Prisoner by final judgment. Number 3. Prisoner escapes through his negligence. Liability of escaping prisoners. Convict by the reason of final judgment according to Article 157. Number 2. Detention prisoner. No liability. Article 225. Escape are prisoners under the custody of a person not a public officer. Number 1. The offender is a public person. Number 2. Confined to him. Conveyance or custody of prisoner or person under arrest. Number 3. Prisoner or person under arrest escapes. And number 4. Offender consents to the escape of the person or person under arrest or that the escape takes place through his negligence. Article 235. Maltreatment of prisoners. Offender is a public officer or employee. Number 2. Under his charge, prisoner or detention, prisoners. Number 3. Manner of maltreatment. A. By overdoing correction or handling of prisoner under his charge, either 1. Of punishment not authorized by regulations, or 2. By inflicting such punishment in cruel and humiliating manner. B. By maltreating such prisoner to extort confusions or to obtain some information from the prisoner. Article 245. Abuse against chastity. Offender, public officer. Number 2, he solicits or makes immoral or incidents advances to women. Women must be interested in matters pending before offender for decisions in the respect to which she is required to submit report articles superior. B. Under custody of offender who is warden or public officer directly charged with care and custody of prisoner or person under arrest, or C. Wife, daughters, sisters, or relative within some degree by affinity and person in custody of offender. Other crimes committed by public officers. Number 1. Article 204, knowingly rendering unjust judgment. Article 205, judgment rendered through negligence. 206, unjust intercolatory order. 207, malicious delay in the administration of justice. 209, betrayal of trust by an attorney or solicitor. 213, frauds against the public treasury and similar offenses. 214, other frauds. 215, prohibited transaction. 216, possession of prohibited interest by a public officer. And 218, failure of accountable officer to render accounts.